What is this? Explain this bank statement.
It's nothing. Just drop it.
Drop it. You're hiding something from me.
You're overreacting. It's not a big deal.
You go insane. You think it's over? It's just beginning.
The night I discovered my savings were gone, my husband didn't deny it. Richard stood across from me in our kitchen, one hand resting on the counter I had scrubbed for nearly 40 years, and smiled like I had asked him something foolish. "You're 64, Taylor," he said softly. "You forget things. No one is going to believe you." My hands shook as I stared at the bank statement showing $93,842 missing from the account I had built dollar by dollar. That night I found our old iPad charging in a drawer. A voice memo had synced by mistake. Then I heard Richard's voice, and he was laughing. If this story already makes your heart hurt, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, would you confront someone you loved right away, or stay quiet until you had proof? And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Before that night, I would have told you Richard Monroe was the kind of man who could fix anything. A clogged sink, a broken porch rail, a car that refused to start on the coldest morning in January. For nearly 4 decades, my husband carried a toolbox and the confidence of a man who believed every problem had a practical answer. I was 26, working my first full-time job at the Dayton Public Library, and Richard was 30, standing in my aunt's kitchen with a wrench in one hand and paint across his cheek. He made me laugh that day. He made me feel safe. For a long time, I believed those two things were the same. We built our life in a small brick house. Richard replaced the kitchen cabinets himself. I chose pale yellow paint because I wanted the room to feel warm during Ohio winters. When our daughter Megan was born, we turned the second bedroom into a nursery with a rocking chair my father had made for me. We had hard years, of course. There were months when Richard's remodeling business barely covered the mortgage. There were years when I packed peanut butter sandwiches because we were saving for Megan's braces or a new furnace. When Megan was in college, I took extra work cataloging donated books and ran summer reading programs for children. I never complained. I was proud that we kept going. Maybe that is why the loss of my savings hurt, in a way I still struggle to explain. It was not just money. It was every small sacrifice I had made when no one was looking. After my library hours, I sometimes stayed late to sort old books donated by families clearing out estates. During summers, I organized story hours and helped teachers prepare reading lists. I saved birthday checks. I drove the same blue sedan for 14 years. I bought coats on clearance and learned how to make one chicken stretch across 3 dinners. Then when my Aunt June passed away, she left me a modest inheritance. It was not enough to change anyone's life overnight, but it gave me a sense of security I had never known. I put most of it into a separate savings account. Richard knew about it. I never hid it from him. At first, he even encouraged me. "Good for you, Tay," he said, when I told him I wanted to leave it untouched. Every woman should have a little something put away. Those words came back to me later with a bitterness I could taste. That account became my quiet promise to myself. It was for emergencies, medical bills, home repairs, or a small trip after retirement. It was not a secret escape fund, and it was never meant to be a weapon against Richard. It was proof that I had been careful with the years I had been given. By the time I retired from the library, the account had grown to nearly $94,000. I used to look at their balance and feel relieved. Then Richard's business began to change. For most of his career, he ran a small home repair company. Decks, bathrooms, drywall roofs after storms. He had 2 regular crew members and a reputation for being dependable. But in the last couple of years, jobs started falling through. A contractor he trusted went out of business. Material costs rose. One client refused to pay after a dispute over a kitchen renovation. Richard called it a rough patch. Business is cyclical, he told me one night, rubbing his temples. It'll pick back up. I believed him because I wanted to. But little things began to shift. The mail stopped arriving in the basket near the front door. Richard collected it before I could see it. When I asked why, he said he was sorting bills from junk mail. He began taking phone calls in his office with the door shut. If I walked past, his voice would lower, then stop. He also became strangely interested in my savings. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. It started with harmless questions. Do you still use that bank on Main Street? Did they ever make you switch to those text message codes? Where do you keep your password book? You know, in case something happens to you. The first time he asked, I laughed. Something happens to me. You know what I mean? He said. If you're in the hospital, I should be able to handle things. It sounded reasonable, tender even. So I told him the bank's name. I told him I had online access. I did not give him my password, but I knew he had seen me log in before. I had always believed a marriage was built on enough trust that you did not have to guard every little thing. That belief is dangerous when the person beside you has already begun to see your trust as an opening. Around that same time, Richard began insisting I had forgotten things. He would say he had told me about a meeting when he had not. He would insist we had agreed to delay a repair when I knew we had not. Once he told Megan I had misplaced a utility bill and nearly caused our electricity to be shut off. I was embarrassed until I found the bill tucked beneath a stack of papers in his office. When I asked him about it, he shrugged. Maybe you put it there, he said. I remember standing in that doorway, staring at him. Why would I put a bill in your office? Richard smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Taylor, you've been under a lot of stress. You don't always remember every little thing. It was such a small sentence, but it stayed with me. After that, I started doubting myself in ways I never had before. I checked the stove twice before leaving the house. I made lists for groceries, appointments, phone calls, even things I had already done. Megan noticed my lists. Mom, are you okay? She asked gently. Dad said you've been worried lately. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. What exactly did your father say? I asked. She looked uncomfortable. Nothing terrible, just that you've seemed forgetful. He thinks you might be overwhelmed since retirement. I forced a smile and changed the subject. I did not want my daughter to think I was fragile. I did not want to make her choose between us. And I still could not imagine that Richard might be planting those ideas on purpose. Not then. Not until I saw the missing money. Not until he looked me in the eye and told me nobody would believe me. The worst part was that he sounded certain. And suddenly, all those questions about my bank, all those vanished letters and all those quiet phone calls behind a closed door no longer looked like ordinary worries from a struggling husband. They looked like preparation. I barely slept that night. The bank statement lay on the kitchen table until nearly midnight, beside the cold cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number again. $93,842.17. Gone. Not misplaced, not moved into another account I recognized. Gone. Richard had gone to bed as if nothing had happened. He did not slam a door. He did not apologize. He did not even pretend to be worried. He simply stood, rinsed his coffee mug and said, "You should get some rest, Taylor. You're making yourself sick over nothing." Over nothing. That was the phrase that kept me awake. By 7 the next morning, I was dressed and sitting in my car outside the bank on Main Street. I had not told Richard where I was going. He was still asleep when I left, or at least he pretended to be. I remember looking at him in bed, his back turned toward me, and wondering how long he had been lying beside me while planning to take everything I had saved. The bank had just opened when I walked in. A young teller named Amanda recognized me. I had banked there for more than 20 years, and in a small city, people remembered faces. "Good morning, Mrs. Munro," she said. "How can I help you?" I tried to answer normally, but my voice cracked. "I need to speak with someone about my savings account." Her expression changed immediately. She led me to a small office with frosted glass walls and asked a manager to come in. Within minutes, a woman named Rebecca sat across from me with a laptop open between us. "Can you tell me what concerns you?" she asked gently. I handed her the printed statement. "My savings are gone," I said. "I didn't authorize those transfers." Rebecca studied the page, then began pulling up the account history. I watched her eyes move across the screen. At first, she looked focused. Then her mouth tightened. "What is it?" I asked. "There were several outgoing transfers," she said carefully. "They were completed over a period of 3 weeks. 3 weeks," I repeated. She nodded. The amounts were divided into smaller transactions. Some were under $10,000. Others were slightly above that. My hands went cold. "Can you tell where they went? I can see the destination accounts, but I may need additional review before I can give you full details. First, I need to confirm whether you initiated any changes to your online profile." "I didn't change anything." Rebecca clicked again. Then she paused. "Mrs. Munro," she said, "the phone number connected to the 2-step verification on your account was changed about a month ago." For a second, I could not understand what she meant. "Changed to what?" She read the last 4 digits aloud. I knew them immediately. They were Richard's. My stomach dropped so hard I had to grip the arms of the chair. "No," I whispered. "That can't be right." Rebecca looked uncomfortable. "The change was confirmed through an electronic authorization. I didn't authorize it. Was there anyone who may have had access to your account information? A spouse, an adult child, someone helping you with online banking?" I stared at the screen, but all I could see was Richard standing in our kitchen the night before, telling me nobody would believe me. He had not guessed. He had known. I asked Rebecca to print everything she could. Dates, times, transfer amounts, login activity, security changes. She told me the bank would need to investigate and that they could place an alert on the account immediately. "Please do," I said, "and don't call the number currently listed. Call me directly on my cell phone." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "I understand." As I left the bank, I sat in my car with the printed pages in my lap. My hands shook so badly, I could barely start the engine. I should have driven somewhere quiet. I should have called a lawyer. I should have taken a deep breath and thought through my next move. But I was hurt. And when you are hurt by someone you loved for almost 40 years, pain does not always let you act wisely. I drove straight home. Richard was sitting at the kitchen table when I came in. He had dressed for the day, wearing the navy work shirt he always wore when meeting clients. There was a bowl of oatmeal in front of him, untouched. He looked up when I walked in. "Where were you?" "At the bank." For the first time, something flashed across his face. It was gone almost immediately, but I saw it. Fear. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Why would you do that without talking to me first?" I placed the documents on the table between us. "Why is your phone number attached to my savings account?" He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked down at the papers, then sighed as if I had disappointed him. "Taylor, no. Answer me. You're upset. Answer me." He rubbed his forehead slowly. "I changed the number because you always complain about those verification messages. You never know where your phone is. I was trying to make things easier. You transferred my money. I moved it. Where? To someplace safer." "What place?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Why are you interrogating me like I'm some criminal? Because you took almost $94,000 from my account. It was our money." "No," I said. "It was my savings." His eyes changed then. The softness disappeared. "You have no idea what I've had to carry," he said. "You think sitting in that library for 30 years gave you some special claim to everything." I felt as though he had slapped me. "My money helped this family," I said quietly. "My work helped this family. My inheritance was left to me. And I've spent my whole life building this house Fixing things, keeping us afloat. You didn't keep us afloat by stealing from me. Richard stood so quickly that his chair scraped against the floor. Watch your words, then show me where the money is. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock above the stove ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, Richard gave a short laugh. It was not warm, it was not nervous, it was cruel. You're going to make yourself look foolish, he said. You're confused. You're emotional and you're already forgetting things. You walk into a bank, waving papers around, accusing your husband. Who do you think people are going to believe? I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Give me the documents, I said. What documents? The account information, the new account, the transfers, all of it. You don't need to see every detail. I do. No, Taylor, you don't. The way he said my name made it sound small, like I was a child asking questions at the wrong time. He picked up the papers from the table and pushed them back toward me. You should calm down, he said. Go take a walk. Call Megan. Maybe she can talk some sense into you. That was when I knew he had already spoken to her. I left the kitchen before my anger could make me say something I could not take back. I went upstairs, locked myself in the bedroom, and called Megan. She answered on the third ring. Hi, Mom. Is everything okay? The sound of her voice nearly broke me. No, I said. I don't think it is. I told her about the account. I told her about the phone number, the transfers, and Richard's refusal to show me where the money had gone. There was a long silence on the line. Then Megan took a breath. Mom, Dad told me you've been really stressed. I closed my eyes. What did he tell you? He said you've been forgetting things lately, that you've been worried about money even though he's handling it. He said you got upset with him last week and accused him of hiding bills. He is hiding bills. Mom. No, Megan. Listen to me. He changed my bank number to his phone. He took my savings. I'm not saying you're wrong, she said quickly. I'm just saying maybe there's an explanation. Maybe Dad was trying to protect the money. Maybe he moved it because of the business. Then why didn't he tell me? She did not answer. I could hear children in the background at the pediatric unit where she worked. A cart rolling, a distant voice calling her name. Mom, she said softly. Maybe you should take a breath before you do anything drastic. You know, Dad, he wouldn't just steal from you. I looked toward the bedroom door. Downstairs, I heard Richard's footsteps moving calmly through the house. That was the moment I understood the real danger. He had not only taken my money, he had made sure that when I cried out for help, the people I loved would wonder whether I was imagining it. And downstairs in the drawer beside the charging cable, the old iPad was waiting with a voice memo I had not yet fully heard. Waited until Richard left the house before I touched the old iPad again. He had told me he was meeting a client across town. Normally, I would not have paid attention to his schedule. For 38 years, I had accepted the rhythm of his comings and goings without question. Richard left for work. Richard returned home. Richard handled problems. Richard knew what he was doing. That morning, I watched him pull out of the driveway and felt something inside me go still. I locked the front door behind him. Then, I carried the iPad into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed holding it with both hands. The device was old enough that the case had turned yellow around the edges. Megan had bought it for us years ago, so we could video call her when she first moved into her apartment after nursing school. Richard had used it more than I had. He kept it in his office for invoices, photos of repair jobs, and the occasional football game. I had no idea why the voice memo had appeared on it. Maybe Richard had accidentally recorded it. Maybe he had meant to delete it and forgotten. Maybe he had assumed no one would ever look through a forgotten tablet in the back of a drawer. Whatever the reason, I pressed play. At first, there was only static. A door opened. I heard the clink of glass against a table. Then Richard's voice came through quieter than usual, but unmistakable. You worry too much, Martin. My heart began beating so hard I could hear it. Another man spoke. I recognized the voice after a moment. Martin Hayes, Richard's business partner. I had met him twice at holiday cookouts and once at a restaurant when Richard wanted to discuss a possible remodeling project. He was the kind of man who smiled easily but never let his eyes soften. Martin sounded uneasy. "I'm telling you, Richard, this has to be clean. If she finds out where the money went, we've got a problem." Richard laughed. Not loudly, not nervously. He laughed as though the whole thing amused him. "She won't find out," he said. "And even if she does, she won't know what to do with it." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Martin said, "It's still her account." "It was her account," Richard replied. "Now it's in escrow where it needs to be." The room around me blurred. Escrow. I had heard that word before. In real estate transactions, home purchases, refinancing. I did not understand every legal detail, but I understood enough to know that money did not go into escrow for no reason. Martin spoke again. "And you're sure you can get her to sign Friday?" Richard let out a breath. I could picture him leaning back in his chair, one ankle crossed over his knee, acting like the smartest man in the room. "She'll sign what I put in front of her, if I handle it the right way." "What if she asks questions?" "She always asks questions," Richard said. "That's why I've been working on the other part." There was a pause. Then Martin said, "The memory thing." My fingers tightened around the iPad. Richard's voice lowered. "I've already planted the idea with Megan. Taylor misplaces things, gets emotional, forgets conversations. It's not hard. People see what you tell them to see." I felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Every missing bill, every conversation he claimed I had forgotten, every worried look Megan had given me. It had not been random. It had been rehearsed. Martin sounded more cautious now. "You're taking a risk." "No," Richard said. "I'm being practical. She's 64. She retired. She spends half her time writing lists and worrying about things that don't matter. If I say she's overwhelmed, people believe it. If Megan says she's concerned, people believe it even more." His words sank into me slowly, each one heavier than the last. I had spent weeks wondering whether I was becoming forgetful. I had checked the stove twice. I had started writing lists because I was afraid of making mistakes. I had felt embarrassed in front of my own daughter, and all along Richard had been creating the fear he later used against me. Martin asked, "So what exactly is in the paperwork?" Richard hesitated for only a second. "Some future care documents, basic stuff. A medical evaluation, a financial power of attorney, and documents connected to the refinance." "The refinance on the house." "Yes." My eyes moved toward the bedroom window, toward the front yard, toward the house that had held almost every memory of my adult life. Richard's voice continued. "Once she signs, we can move the house into Oak Ridge Property Holdings. It'll look like a business restructuring, temporary, nothing that raises flags. Oak Ridge Property Holdings." The name meant nothing to me then, but it would soon become a name I hated. Martin's voice sharpened. "And she won't realize she's signing away the house. She won't read the fine print," Richard said. "She trusts me." I stopped breathing. The words did not sound angry. That was what made them worse. He did not say them like a man in a desperate argument. He said them like a man discussing a tool he planned to use. She trusts me. For nearly 4 decades I had trusted him. I trusted him when he said business was slow but manageable. I trusted him when he said he was sorting the mail. I trusted him when he asked about my passwords, just in case. And now I understood that my trust was not something he valued. It was something he had spent. Martin asked, "What happens after the house is transferred?" Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The money gets us through the debt. The property gives us room to breathe. And if Taylor gets difficult, I can push the care plan." "What does that mean?" "It means she may need more support than she realizes." There was another pause. Then Martin said something that made the blood drain from my face. "You mean a facility?" Richard gave a low, impatient sigh. "Don't make it sound dramatic. I'm talking about a place where she can be looked after, somewhere safe. Somewhere she can't interfere while I clean up this mess. I stared at the iPad screen. My hands had gone numb. He had not only taken my savings, he was planning to take my house. And if I fought him, he intended to make me look unstable enough that people would accept the idea of putting me somewhere I could not fight back at all. Martin's voice became almost a whisper. "You really think she won't catch on?" Richard laughed again. That same cold, careless laugh. "By the time she does, it'll be too late." The recording ended a few minutes later, but I did not move. I sat on the bed for what felt like hours, though the clock said only 23 minutes had passed. 23 minutes. That was all it took for my marriage to become something unrecognizable. I thought about Richard downstairs the night before, standing in our kitchen, like he owned the truth. I thought about how easily he had told me no one would believe me. He had not said it as a threat in the heat of anger. He had said it because he believed it. He believed I was too soft, too embarrassed, too dependent, too old to defend myself. For a few minutes I wanted to scream. I wanted to call Megan and play the recording through the phone. I wanted to wait in the driveway and confront Richard the moment he came home. But then I remembered his voice. "By the time she does, it'll be too late." That sentence stopped me. Richard had been preparing for this longer than I knew. He had already changed my bank security information. He had already moved my money. He had already spoken to Megan. He had paperwork waiting. He had a meeting on Friday. If I walked downstairs and accused him now, he would deny everything. He would erase documents. He would call me emotional. He would tell Megan I was spiraling. And for the first time in my life, I understood that staying quiet was not the same as giving up. Sometimes silence was how you gathered strength. I replayed the voice memo twice more. Then I emailed it to myself. I sent another copy to an address Richard did not know existed. And before I closed the iPad, I whispered something to the empty room. "You made one mistake, Richard." My voice trembled, but I did not take the words back. "You thought I would stay afraid." The first person I called was Denise Carter. I had known Denise for almost 30 years. We met at a library fundraiser when her son was in middle school and Megan was still wearing braces. She had worked in banking for most of her life, first as a loan officer, then in compliance. She was the kind of woman who noticed details other people missed. A changed date, a missing signature, a sentence that sounded harmless until you read it twice. More importantly, Denise was the kind of friend who never made me feel foolish for being afraid. She answered on the second ring. "Taylor. Everything okay?" I looked toward the closed bedroom door. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. "No," I said. "I need you to listen to something." There was a pause. "Are you safe?" "I think so. Richard's out for a few hours." "Then don't say anything else over the phone," she said quickly. "Can you come here?" I wanted to tell her everything right then. I wanted to pour out the missing money, the bank account, the lies he had planted in Megan's mind, the voice memo that had turned my marriage into something I no longer recognized. But Denise had always been practical, so I simply said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Before I left, I did something I had never imagined doing in my own home. I made copies. I found an old USB drive in the desk drawer near the printer. It had a faded label from years ago when I used it for library files. I transferred the voice memo onto it, then copied the bank statements and the screenshots I had taken from my online account. After that, I emailed everything to myself again. One copy went to my personal email. One went to an address I had created years earlier for online shopping and forgot most of the time. Then I printed the transcript summary I had typed while listening to the recording. I did not know whether it would matter legally, but I wanted the words on paper. I wanted proof that I had heard Richard say them. She trusts me. By the time she does, it'll be too late. I folded the pages and placed them in my purse. Then I opened my closet and looked at the small fireproof lockbox Richard had bought years ago for passports, insurance papers, and birth certificates. He had always called it our emergency box. Now I understood that emergencies had different meanings depending on who was creating them. I took my passport, my social security card, the deed copy I could find, and the folder containing old financial records. I did not take everything. I was too afraid Richard might notice. But I took enough. When I stepped into Denise's house less than half an hour later, she was waiting at the door. She did not ask me to explain first. She hugged me. That small kindness nearly broke me. Her home smelled like coffee and lemon furniture polish. The same framed photos sat on the mantelpiece, her late husband, her grandchildren, a picture of the two of us at a library charity luncheon years ago. Nothing in that room had changed, and somehow that made me feel worse. Because my own house, the one I had lived in for almost 4 decades, no longer felt safe enough to breathe in. Denise led me to her dining room table. She set down 2 mugs of coffee, though neither of us touched ours. "Play it," she said. I placed the iPad between us. My hands shook as I pressed the screen. We listened in silence. Richard's voice filled the room. He sounded calm, confident, certain. Every time he said my name, I felt smaller. Every time he laughed, Denise's expression hardened a little more. When the recording ended, she did not speak right away. She looked down at the table, clasping her hands together. Finally, she said, "Taylor, this is serious." I gave a weak laugh that did not sound like mine. "Yes, I know." "No," she said, looking directly at me. "I mean serious in a way you need to understand. This isn't just a marriage problem. This is financial abuse, and it may be fraud." The word fraud made my stomach twist. I had spent all morning calling it missing money. Then I called it a betrayal. But fraud sounded bigger, colder. It sounded like police reports, lawyers, courtrooms, and people reading through every private part of your life. "I don't want to ruin him," I whispered. Denise leaned forward. "Taylor, he took your money without your permission. He changed your security information. He's trying to make people believe you are incapable of managing your own life. He's talking about moving your home into a company and putting you into a facility." Her voice softened. "You are not ruining him. He is doing this to himself." I stared at my hands. For years I had thought loyalty meant protecting your spouse's reputation, even when they embarrassed you. I had covered for Richard when he was late. I had told Megan business was slow when he came home furious. I had avoided asking questions because I did not want to make him feel like a failure. But sitting at Denise's dining room table, I began to understand something I should have understood earlier. Protecting someone who is hurting you is not loyalty. Sometimes it is just fear wearing the clothes of love. Denise reached for a notepad. "First, we make sure he cannot erase anything," she said. She wrote in neat, steady letters. "Save the audio in at least 3 places." I already did. "Good. Do not keep all the copies in your house. Keep one with me." I handed her the USB drive. She placed it in a drawer beside the dining room hutch, then locked it with a key. "Second," she continued, "you need a lawyer, not just any lawyer. Someone who understands financial exploitation and family law." "I don't know a lawyer." "I do." She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "Her name is Claire Donovan. She helped a friend of mine after her son convinced her to sign documents she didn't understand. Claire knows exactly how these situations work." I felt a flash of shame. "Do you think people will believe me?" Denise stopped scrolling. "Taylor, evidence matters. You have a bank record. You have a voice memo. You have a changed verification number. And you have a husband who clearly believes you are too scared to fight him." She pressed the call button. "Let's prove him wrong." Claire Donovan's office could see us that afternoon. The moment Denise told me that I wanted to say no, I wanted one more day to think. One more night to sleep in my own bed and pretend I could still fix this quietly. I wanted Richard to come home, look ashamed, and tell me there had been some mistake. But then I remembered the recording. There had been no mistake. There had been a plan. So Denise drove me downtown. Claire's office was on the 4th floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. The reception area was quiet, decorated with soft lamps, plants, and framed certificates. I remember noticing a bowl of peppermints on the desk and thinking how strange it was that the world could still contain ordinary things while mine was falling apart. Claire was younger than I expected, maybe in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled into a low bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Monroe, Denise told me you may be in a difficult situation. Please call me Taylor," I said. She nodded. "All right, Taylor. Start wherever you need to." So I did. I told her about the savings account, the changed phone number, Richard's comments about my memory, Megan's confusion, the papers he wanted me to sign. Then I played the voice memo. Claire did not interrupt once. When it ended, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I could not read. "Do you have the original file?" she asked. "Yes." "And copies?" "Yes." "Good. Don't edit it. Don't trim it. Don't add notes to the file itself. Preserve it exactly as it is." She turned to her computer and began taking notes. "From this moment forward," she said, "you should assume Richard may try to cover his tracks. Do not confront him about the recording. Do not tell him you've spoken to a lawyer, and do not sign anything he gives you. What if he pressures me? Tell him you want time to read it. Then take a picture and send it to me." Her calmness made me breathe a little easier. Claire explained that she would contact the bank immediately to request preservation of all records related to my account. Login times, IP addresses, authentication changes, electronic signatures, transfer histories. "Can the bank get the money back?" I asked. "I can't promise that yet," she said honestly. "But the sooner we act, the better chance we have of tracing it." Then she looked at me carefully. "Taylor, I need you to understand something. Your husband may try to make you doubt yourself. He may say you misunderstood. He may say he was protecting you. He may even try to make your daughter believe you are unstable." My throat tightened. "He already has." Claire nodded once. "That is why we document everything now." Before I left, she gave me a small notebook. "Write down every conversation. Date, time, exact words if you remember them. Keep it somewhere he cannot find." I held that notebook in my hands as Denise drove me home. The sky had turned grey and rain tapped softly against the windshield. When we pulled into my driveway, Richard's truck was not there yet. For the first time, I did not feel relief. I felt urgency, because somewhere out there my husband was still moving through the world as though I knew nothing. And I had only just begun to see how far he was willing to go. By Sunday afternoon, I had learned how difficult it was to sit across from someone who was trying to erase you. Richard had been unusually pleasant for 2 days. That was what frightened me most. He made coffee in the mornings. He asked whether I wanted eggs or toast. He even brought home a small bunch of grocery store tulips and placed them in a glass vase on the kitchen counter, as if flowers could make the air between us feel normal again. I thanked him each time because I did not know what else to do. But I watched him. I watched the way he checked his phone whenever I left the room. I watched how often he went into his office and shut the door. I watched the tiny pause in his expression whenever I mentioned the bank, as though he was measuring whether I had learned more than I should have. Claire had told me not to confront him. "Let him believe his story is still working," she said. "People who think they are in control make mistakes." So I smiled when I had to. I nodded when he spoke, and I wrote everything down in the small notebook Claire had given me. Sunday dinner had been Richard's idea. "Megan's coming over," he said that morning while buttering toast at the kitchen counter. "It'll be good for all of us to sit down together." His tone was gentle, too gentle. I stood by the sink, rinsing a coffee mug that had already been clean. "Did Megan say she was coming because she wanted to?" I asked. Richard glanced at me. "She's worried about you." There it was again, not angry, not loud, just a quiet reminder that he had already planted himself between me and my daughter. "I'm fine," I said. He gave me a sad little smile. "Taylor, nobody is saying you're not. but that was exactly what he was saying. By 5:30, the house smelled like roasted chicken rosemary and the mashed potatoes I had made for Megan since she was a little girl. I had always believed meals could repair things. A warm plate, familiar food, the right people at the table. That evening, I understood that a dinner table could also become a courtroom. Megan arrived just after 6. She came in wearing navy scrubs, under a grey cardigan, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked tired the way she always did after a long shift at the hospital, but when she saw me, her face softened. "Hi, Mom." She hugged me. For 1 second, I almost started crying. I held her tighter than I meant to. Then Richard stepped forward and kissed her cheek. "Glad you made it," he said. "Your mom's been having a rough few days." Megan looked at me carefully. I forced a smile. "I'm glad you're here." Dinner began quietly. Richard poured sparkling water into glasses, as though we were celebrating something. Megan asked about the weather, her patients, a neighbor's new puppy. I answered when spoken to, but every question felt like a thin layer of ice beneath my feet. Richard was waiting for the right moment. I knew it. He found it when Megan mentioned that one of her co-workers had helped her mother move into an assisted living community. "It can be a hard transition," Megan said, "but sometimes it gives people more support than they realize." Richard set down his fork. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell your mother." My stomach tightened. Megan looked from him to me. "What do you mean?" Richard sighed, the performance already beginning. "Taylor has been overwhelmed lately. She's worried about the bank, worried about bills, worried about things that aren't really problems. I've been trying to make things easier for her." I stared at my plate. "Richard," I said quietly, "I'm worried because my savings account was emptied." He shook his head slowly, as if I had proven his point. "See, that's what I mean. The money was moved temporarily. I've explained that. You have not explained where it went." Megan's eyes shifted toward him. Richard gave her a patient look. "It's tied up in a business matter. Nothing more." "A business matter involving my personal savings?" I asked. His jaw tightened, but only for a moment. "Taylor, I'm not doing this with you again." The words were calm, but they carried a warning. Megan put her hand on the table. "Dad, maybe you should just show Mom the paperwork." Richard looked at her almost surprised. Then he smiled. "Of course. That's why I wanted us all together." He stood and walked toward his office. My pulse began to race. When he returned, he carried a thick manila folder. I recognized it instantly. It was the folder I had seen him sliding into the drawer in his office 2 days earlier. He placed it on the dining table between us. "These are just some planning documents," he said. "Nothing dramatic. We're getting older. It's responsible to prepare for the future." Megan nodded slowly. "That makes sense." I wanted to say no. It doesn't. Not when it comes from him. But Claire's words came back to me. "Do not sign anything. Take pictures. Preserve what he gives you." So I opened the folder. The first few pages looked harmless enough. There were brochures for senior communities, lists of in-home care services, notes about Medicare coverage, and a pamphlet titled "Planning for the Next Chapter." Richard watched me carefully as I turned each page. Then I found the documents beneath them. A medical release form, a document labeled "Durable Power of Attorney," another labeled "Financial Power of Attorney." My fingertips went cold. Richard leaned back in his chair. "These are standard," he said, "in case something ever happens. If you're in the hospital, if you're confused, if you need someone to manage things for you." "I don't need someone to manage things for me," I said. His expression barely changed. "No one is saying you do. But it's smart to have protections in place." Megan looked uneasy now. "Mom," she said gently, "it doesn't have to mean anything bad. A lot of people set this up." I looked at my daughter. She was trying to help. I knew she was. That was what made it hurt so much. She did not know what I knew. She had not heard her father laugh about making her believe I was losing my memory. She had not heard him talk about putting me somewhere safe, so I could not interfere with his plans. I wanted to take out my phone. I wanted to press play and let Richard's own voice fill the room. But I could see the folder in front of me. I could see the careful way he had built this moment. If I exposed the recording too soon, he would deny it, call it incomplete, accuse me of misunderstanding it. Claire had told me the evidence mattered most when it could not be explained away. So I swallowed the rage rising in my throat. "I'd like time to read these," I said. Richard's face hardened slightly. "There's nothing to read. It's straightforward. Then you won't mind if I take them upstairs and look them over." For a second, no one spoke. Then he gave a small smile. "Of course. Take your time." But I noticed he did not release the folder right away. His fingers stayed on the edge until I gently pulled it toward myself. Megan reached across the table and touched my hand. "Mom, we just want to make sure you're okay." I looked down at her hand resting over mine. I wanted to tell her that I was not okay. I wanted to say that the man she called Dad had taken my money, stolen access to my bank, and was now trying to make me sign away the right to control my own life. Instead, I nodded. "I know," I said, "and I appreciate that." The lie tasted like ash. After dinner, Megan helped me carry dishes into the kitchen. Richard stayed in the dining room pretending to organize the papers. For one brief moment, Megan and I were alone. She dried a plate while I rinsed another. "Mom," she said softly, "are you sure you're all right?" I looked at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. "No," I said. She stopped drying. I turned toward her, then felt the weight of Richard's presence just beyond the doorway. "But I will be," I added. Megan looked confused. Before she could ask more, Richard entered the kitchen. "You heading out?" he asked her. She nodded, gathering her coat. At the door, she hugged me again. This time she whispered, "Please don't shut me out." I watched her walk to her car, then waited until Richard went upstairs to shower. The moment I heard the bathroom door close, I took the folder to the bedroom. I laid every page across the bedspread. Then I used my phone to photograph everything. Every signature line, every clause, every page where Richard's name appeared beside words like authority, access transfer, and financial decisions. When I finished, I sent the images to Claire. My message was short. "He tried to get me to sign these tonight. Megan was here. I did not sign anything." Her reply came less than 2 minutes later. "Do not sign. Keep the originals safe if possible. These documents are exactly what we feared." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Downstairs, the kitchen lights were still on. The house was quiet again. But now I knew the truth. Richard was not preparing for my future. He was preparing to take it. The next morning, I woke before Richard. For a few seconds, I lay still and listened to the sound of his breathing beside me. It was strange how familiar it still was. For almost 40 years, that sound had meant I was home. It had meant someone was beside me when storms shook the windows, when Megan was sick as a child, when bills piled up, when life became too heavy to carry alone. Now it made my chest tighten. I slipped out of bed, quietly, took my phone from the nightstand and went downstairs. The folder Richard had shown Megan was still in the dining room cabinet where I had placed it after photographing every page. I opened the cabinet carefully and checked. It was there. So were the copies I had printed from the bank. I made one more set of photographs, then sent them to the private email address Claire had instructed me to use. I didn't know whether I was being overly cautious. Maybe another woman would have confronted her husband by then. Maybe she would have packed a bag, called the police, or screamed until the neighbors heard. But I had spent almost 4 decades learning Richard's moods. I knew when he was angry. I knew when he was embarrassed. And I was beginning to understand that the most dangerous version of him was not angry at all. It was the version that smiled. At 9:30, while Richard was in the shower, my phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Can you talk privately?" I stepped onto the back porch, closing the door behind me. The morning was grey and damp. Rain clung to the wooden railing and the backyard looked washed out beneath the heavy Ohio sky. Yes, I whispered. I heard back from the bank, Claire said. My breath caught. What did they find? There's more than one destination account, she said. But the largest transfers went to an account connected to a company called Oak Ridge Property Holdings, LLC. The name sent a cold rush through me. Oak Ridge, I said. Yes. Does that name mean anything to you? It was in the recording. Richard told Martin they were going to move the house into Oak Ridge Property Holdings. There was a short silence on the line. That connects the money transfer to the property plan, Claire said. It is very important. Can Richard do that, I asked. Can he just put our house into a company? Not lawfully, without your participation. Not if you are an owner on the deed. But people sometimes attempt to use old documents, forged signatures, misleading paperwork or pressure. We need to find out exactly what he has submitted and what he intends to submit. I gripped the porch railing. What do I do? For now, do not let him know you understand the connection. And Taylor, I need you to look for anything that could show his next step. A schedule, a closing appointment, emails, printed documents, anything with dates, property addresses, or the company name. I looked toward Richard's office window. I may be able to find something. Only if you can do it safely, Claire said. Do not break into anything locked. Do not put yourself in danger. But if there are documents in plain sight or papers he leaves out, preserve them. When the call ended, I stood outside for another minute, trying to steady myself. Oak Ridge Property Holdings. The name sounded so ordinary. That was part of what made it terrifying. A company name printed on a document, a business account, a closing appointment, clean words for a dirty plan. Richard had hidden what he was doing behind paperwork and legal language because he knew people trusted paperwork. He knew that if he could make theft look like planning and manipulation look like concern, then he could make me look unreasonable for fighting back. When I went back inside, Richard was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee. Who was that? He asked. I kept my face calm. Denise. He watched me over the rim of his mug. What did she want? She was checking on me. His mouth tightened. Taylor, I hope you're not telling Denise private things about our marriage. I opened the refrigerator and pretended to look for milk. Why would that concern you? Because she doesn't understand what's happening. She'll fill your head with worst-case scenarios. I turned toward him slowly. And you understand what's happening? Richard's eyes fixed on mine. I understand you're scared, he said. And I understand you don't always see the whole picture. There it was again, that soft, careful cruelty. He did not have to raise his voice. He did not need to call me names. He only had to keep repeating the same story until I doubted my own. I took a breath. I'll be fine, I said. For a moment, he looked almost disappointed that I had not argued. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stepped away from the counter. Yeah, he said, moving toward his office. I'll be there. The office door closed behind him. I stood in the kitchen with my heart pounding. For the next hour, Richard stayed behind that door. I could not hear every word, but I heard enough. Friday afternoon. She doesn't know. Martin has the paperwork. When he came out, he had changed into a clean button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes. He picked up his keys from the counter. Meeting, I asked. Business. With Martin. He paused, then smiled. You're paying a lot of attention to my schedule lately. I'm your wife. Exactly, he said. So trust me. He left before I could respond. The second I heard his truck pull away, I went to his office. My hands were trembling before I even opened the door. I had been inside that room hundreds of times over the years. It was where Richard handled invoices, stored tools, catalogs, and kept old framed photos of the remodeling projects he was proudest of. But now it looked different. The desk was too neat. The shelves were too carefully arranged. Everything felt placed with purpose. I began with the obvious places. The desktop, the side table, the printer tray, nothing. Then I opened the drawer where I had seen him place papers before. It was locked. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the small silver lock. Claire had told me not to force anything, so I did not. But beside the desk was a black file box with the lid slightly open. Inside were folders labeled by client names, tax forms, old receipts, and a stack of envelopes. I lifted each one carefully. Near the bottom beneath a folder marked 2024 projects, I found a thin blue binder. My stomach clenched before I even opened it. On the first page was the name Oak Ridge Property Holdings, LLC. Under it were several documents I did not fully understand. One showed a business registration with Martin Hayes listed as manager. Another had Richard's name as an authorized representative. There were pages about financing property value and something called asset restructuring. Then I found a page that made my hands go cold. It had our home address printed at the top. Below it was a proposed transfer document. The house was listed as an asset to be transferred into Oak Ridge Property Holdings. I read it once, then again. My name appeared near the bottom beside a blank signature line. There was also a date. Friday at 2:30 p.m. The location was a title office near downtown Dayton. For a moment, I could not move. I thought about the house around me, the yellow kitchen I had chosen, the hallway where Megan's height had been marked against the wall when she was little, the living room where Richard and I had sat together on Christmas mornings, pretending everything was all right, even when money was tight. He was going to take that too. Not because he needed shelter, not because we had agreed to sell, but because he believed he could turn my life into an asset on a page. I took photographs of every document in the binder, the company registration, the property transfer page, the financing notes, the closing appointment. I photographed them twice from different angles to make sure the words were clear. Then I sent them to Claire. My message read, "I found Oak Ridge documents. The house transfer is scheduled for Friday at 2:30 p.m. Richard and Martin are both listed." Her response came quickly. "Do not move the papers. Put everything back exactly where you found it. This is critical evidence." I placed each page back in the binder, carefully trying to remember the order. My fingers felt stiff and clumsy. Then I slid the binder beneath the folder marked 2024 projects and closed the file box. As I turned toward the office door, I noticed something else on the desk, a small notepad. Most of the pages were blank, but one page had been torn off unevenly. The pressure from the writing above had left faint marks behind. I did not touch it at first. Then I angled it toward the window. The indentations were difficult to read, but I could make out a few words. Megan, medical evaluation, Friday morning. My throat tightened. Richard was not only planning the house transfer, he was arranging something involving my daughter before the closing, something he needed Megan to believe, something that would help him make his plan look legitimate. I took a picture of the page and sent it to Claire as well. Then I left the office, closing the door behind me. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the house as though everything were normal. I folded laundry, I wiped down the counters, I watered the tulips Richard had bought, but inside I was no longer waiting for the truth to reveal itself. I had found it, and it had a date, a time, a company name, and my home written across the top. Friday was coming, and Richard had no idea I was already preparing for it. The brochures appeared on Tuesday morning. I found them arranged neatly on the kitchen table beside my coffee cup, as though Richard had set out the morning newspaper. There were 3 of them. One showed a smiling older couple sitting beneath a gazebo. Another featured a bright dining room with flowers on every table. The third had a photograph of a woman with silver hair laughing beside a nurse in pale blue scrubs. Across the top in large gold letters it read, "A safer, simpler next chapter." For a moment, I simply stood there. The coffee maker clicked behind me. Outside, rain tapped against the kitchen window. Everything looked ordinary, but my body knew before my mind could catch up. Richard had finally stopped pretending. He came in from the hallway, wearing a pressed grey sweater and holding his phone. "I thought you should look at those," he said. I kept my hands at my sides. "What are they?" He gave me a patient smile, the same one he had used at Sunday dinner when he placed the power of attorney papers in front of me. "Assisted living communities. There are some very nice options around Dayton." The words settled between us like smoke. I picked up the first brochure. My fingers felt cold against the glossy paper. "You want to put me in a nursing home?" "Don't call it that." His tone sharpened. "You make everything sound worse than it is. What would you call it?" "A place where you can have support. A place where you don't have to worry about bills, appointments, the house, all the things that have been overwhelming you." I looked at him. "I'm not overwhelmed, Richard. I'm being robbed." His mouth tightened. "You see, this is exactly what I mean. You're stuck on this story about the money. It is not a story. You're not thinking clearly." The old version of me might have cried then. I might have pleaded with him to remember who I was. I might have asked how he could speak to me that way after everything we had been through. But I had heard the voice memo. I knew what those words were for. They were not concern. They were a script. So I sat down at the table and opened the brochure again. Richard watched me closely. "This community has transportation meals activities," he said. "They even have memory care support if it becomes necessary." I slowly turned the page. Memory care. He said it casually, almost gently, but I heard the threat beneath it. He wanted me somewhere I could not access my records, somewhere I could not meet with Claire easily, somewhere where his version of events might become the official one. I raised my eyes to his. "You've been planning this for a while." Richard looked away first. "No," he said. "I've been trying to help you for a while." "That's not the same thing." He let out a long breath as if I were exhausting him. "Taylor, you cannot live alone. You cannot manage money. You're making yourself sick with suspicion and you're making everyone around you worried. Everyone Megan is worried." The mention of my daughter hurt exactly the way he intended it to. He leaned both hands on the table. "You should think about what this is doing to her. She has a family and a demanding job. She doesn't need to spend every day wondering whether her mother is having another episode." I felt something rise in me then, not rage exactly, but clarity. He was using Megan as a weapon because he knew I loved her. He was using my age because he believed it made me easier to dismiss. And he was using the word help because it sounded kinder than control. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Richard's face became still. "I didn't ask you to sign anything today." "No," I replied. "Not today." For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he picked up his phone and walked out of the kitchen. I waited until I heard the office door close. Only then did I take out my own phone. Claire answered immediately. "Is everything all right, Richard?" "Brought brochures for assisted living," I said. He mentioned memory care. There was a pause on the line. "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly." "Taylor, I need you to listen carefully. This is escalating. He may try to pressure you into signing documents. He may try to create a scene where you appear confused or distressed. He may even involve other people to make it look as though he is caring for you." My throat tightened. "What should I do?" "I think you should leave the house temporarily." I closed my eyes. The words were simple, but they felt impossible. Leave my house. Not just a house. The place where Megan took her first steps. The place where my mother spent her last Christmas. The place where I had painted walls, planted tulips, folded laundry, waited for Richard to come home from work for almost 4 decades. "I don't want to run," I whispered. "You are not running," Claire said. "You are protecting yourself. You have evidence. You have legal options. But you need to be somewhere he cannot corner you or manipulate you alone." I sat in silence, staring at the brochures, the smiling couples, the sunny gardens, the promise of a safer, simpler next chapter. Richard had chosen those brochures carefully because he wanted me to feel ashamed for resisting. But there was nothing safe about being handed a future you had not chosen. "I'll call Denise," I said. "Good. Take only what you need. Personal identification, financial records, medication, essential clothing, your phone chargers, and anything irreplaceable. Do not take too much. If he notices, it could increase the risk." After the call ended, I sat at the table for a long time. Then I went upstairs. I packed slowly. A small suitcase, 2 pairs of jeans, sweaters, underwear, medication, my reading glasses, the framed photograph of Megan at her nursing school graduation, the faded picture of my parents at the lake when I was 12. I took the notebook Claire had given me. I took the copies of the bank records. I took the USB drive Denise had made me keep after she copied the voice memo. Then I opened the top drawer of my dresser and found the blue silk scarf my mother had worn on special occasions. It had no financial value, no legal importance. But when I held it, I remembered her hands smoothing it around her neck before church. I folded it carefully and placed it in my bag. By late afternoon, I had everything ready. Richard left the house around 4:30, saying he had another meeting with Martin. I watched through the living room window as his truck disappeared down the street. Then I called Denise. "I'm ready," I said. She arrived 20 minutes later in her old white sedan. When I stepped outside carrying my suitcase, the cold air hit my face so sharply that I almost turned back. The house stood behind me, quiet and familiar. I looked at the front door. I thought about locking it. Then I realized I no longer knew whether I was locking Richard out or locking myself away from a life that had already been taken from me. Denise came around the car and held my hand. "You're doing the right thing," she said. I nodded, though tears blurred my vision. I never thought I would leave my own home like this. "You're going to come back," she told me, "but you're going to come back on your terms." I wanted to believe her. As we drove away, I did not look back until we reached the end of the street. The yellow porch light was on. It looked warm from a distance. It looked like a lie. Denise gave me the guest room at her house. She made up the bed with a quilt I had seen dozens of times before and placed a glass of water on the nightstand. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. I thanked her, then sat alone in the room with my suitcase still unopened. My phone buzzed just after 8. It was a message from Megan. "Dad says you left the house. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen. Before I could answer, another message came through. "He says you are upset and confused. He says you just walked out with a bag." My chest tightened. There it was. He had already moved. He had taken my decision to protect myself and turned it into evidence that I was unstable. I typed carefully. "I'm safe, sweetheart. I left because I needed space. I will explain everything when I can." The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Finally, Megan replied, "Okay, I'm worried, Mom. But something about this doesn't feel right." I read that sentence 3 times. Something about this doesn't feel right. It was not trust, not yet. But it was the first crack in the story Richard had built around me. Across town, I knew he was probably sitting in our house telling himself he was winning. He thought I had fled. He thought I was frightened. He thought he had made me look exactly the way he wanted. But I had not left because I was weak. I had left because I was finally learning that survival sometimes begins with walking away from the place where someone is trying to bury your voice. And somewhere inside that quiet house, Richard was still planning for Friday. He had no idea I was planning for it too. The next morning, Claire asked Denise and me to meet her at her office. I had barely slept. Denise's guest room was warm and quiet, but my mind would not rest. Every time I drifted off, I saw Richard standing in the kitchen with those assisted living brochures in his hand. I heard him saying memory care as though he were discussing a vacation package instead of a place where he hoped to put me out of reach. By sunrise, I had given up trying to sleep. I sat at Denise's dining table, in my robe, holding a cup of coffee I never drank. My suitcase was still half open on the floor beside me. It looked temporary, like I was only staying one night. But nothing about my life felt temporary anymore. At 9, Denise drove me downtown. Claire was waiting in the conference room when we arrived. A man I had never met stood beside the window with a laptop bag at his feet. He was tall, maybe in his 50s, with grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Taylor," Claire said, rising from her chair. "This is Dr. Samuel Reeves. He specializes in audio analysis." I shook his hand, but my palms were damp. "Why do we need an audio specialist?" I asked. Claire looked at me gently. "Because the recording is important, but we need to understand every word in it. Some sections are unclear because of background noise. Dr. Reeves has been working on a forensic copy." Dr. Reeves nodded. "I cannot create words that aren't there," he said carefully. "But I can reduce certain sounds and improve the clarity of speech that is already present." The honesty of that sentence comforted me more than I expected. Nothing had been invented. Nothing had been exaggerated. Richard's own voice was enough. Dr. Reeves opened his laptop and connected it to a speaker on the conference table. Claire sat beside me while Denise took the chair across from us. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dr. Reeves pressed play. The recording began with the familiar static. A door opened. Glass touched a tabletop. Richard's voice came through low and confident. "You worry too much, Martin." I had heard it before. But this time the room was silent. There was no rain against the windows, no fear of Richard coming home, no part of me trying to protect him. There was only the truth. Dr. Reeves paused the recording after a few minutes. "This is one of the sections that was difficult to hear clearly," he said. "I'll play the cleaned version." The audio resumed. Martin's voice came through first. "You're sure she'll sign after the evaluation?" Then Richard answered. "She'll sign. Once the doctor puts concerns in writing, she won't have much choice." My stomach twisted. The room became very still. Claire leaned forward. "Play that again." Dr. Reeves did. "Once the doctor puts concerns in writing, she won't have much choice." I felt Denise's hand close over mine beneath the table. Richard had not been casually suggesting that I see a doctor. He was not worrying about my memory. He was trying to create a written record that could be used against me. He wanted a doctor's concern on paper. He wanted an official-looking document that could make his lies feel real. Dr. Reeves continued. Martin asked, "And then what?" "You use the old power of attorney," Richard replied. "That's what it's there for. She signed it years ago. She doesn't even remember it." My breath caught. I remembered signing something years ago. It had been after my father died, when Richard and I updated our wills and basic estate papers. We had trusted the attorney Richard chose. I had signed documents without reading every line because I believed we were planning together. The memory made me feel sick. Richard's voice continued. "Once I've got the refinance done, Oak Ridge takes title. It's cleaner that way. We get the property under the company, clear the pressure, and nobody asks questions." Martin's voice lowered. "The house is worth more than what you're putting on paper." "I know," Richard said. "That's the point." Claire stopped the audio. For a few seconds I could not speak. I stared at the dark surface of the conference table as though it might hold me upright. "He was going to sell our house to his own company," I finally said. Claire nodded slowly. "At a low value," she said. "Based on this recording and the documents you found, it appears he intended to transfer the property below market value to an entity controlled by Martin and connected to him." "But why?" I asked. "Why would he do that instead of just selling it?" "Because it could allow him to control the house indirectly," Claire said. "And if the company holds it, the property may become part of a larger financial arrangement tied to his business debts." The words were complicated, but the meaning was not. Richard wanted to use my home to save himself. Dr. Reeves clicked forward again. "This section is also important," he said. The recording resumed. Martin said, "What about the money from her account? If anyone looks, it'll be obvious." Richard answered without hesitation. "It's the deposit. It makes the deal look real. We move it into escrow show There's cash behind the transaction, then it gets used where it needs to go. I closed my eyes. My savings, every summer reading program, every extra shift, every birthday check tucked away, every dinner I stretched one more night. He had not just taken it because he needed money. He had used it as a prop. He had turned my years of sacrifice into a piece of his fraud. When the recording ended, no one spoke for several moments. I could hear the faint sounds of traffic below the office window, a horn, tires on wet pavement. Somewhere people were going about their normal lives, buying groceries, heading to work, making plans for the weekend. And I was sitting in a lawyer's office hearing proof that my husband had intended to erase me from my own home. Claire closed her folder. "We are filing for emergency relief today," she said. I looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means I will ask the court for an immediate temporary order preventing Richard Martin and Oak Ridge Property Holdings from transferring, refinancing, selling, or encumbering your home while the matter is investigated." "Can the court do that?" "Yes," she said, "especially with the evidence we now have. The bank records the altered security information, the transfer documents, the planned closing, and this audio recording create a serious pattern." "What about Friday?" I asked. Claire looked at the clock. "It's less than 48 hours away. That is why we are moving now." My chest tightened. I had imagined legal action as something slow and distant. Forms filed, weeks of waiting, people saying they would call me back, but Friday was coming like a train I could hear in the distance. Claire turned toward her assistant, who had been waiting near the doorway. "Please prepare the emergency filing," she said. "Include the bank preservation request, the proposed property transfer, the company registration, the audio transcript, and the request to freeze the escrow funds if possible." Her assistant nodded and left quickly. Denise looked at me. "Taylor," she said softly, "you did the hardest part. You saw what he was doing and you refused to look away." I shook my head. "I'm still scared." "Of course you are," Claire said. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting while you are afraid." I thought about Richard, how certain he had sounded, how easily he had said no one would believe me. He believed he had already won because he had my money, my house documents, my daughter's doubts, and a story prepared to make me look weak. But he had made one mistake. He had talked too much. He had laughed too freely, and he had forgotten that I was still listening. Before we left, Claire placed a copy of the emergency filing in front of me. My name was printed at the top, Taylor Monroe. For the first time in days, I did not see it as the name of a frightened woman being pushed out of her own life. I saw it as the name of someone who still had rights, someone who still had a voice, and someone who was no longer willing to let Richard decide what happened next. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I had spent the entire morning trying to prepare myself, but there is no real way to prepare for seeing your private pain arranged into evidence. Claire told me to dress comfortably, not formally. "You do not have to perform," she said. "You only have to tell the truth." Still, I changed outfits 3 times. I finally chose a navy blouse, gray slacks, and the small pearl earrings my mother had given me when Megan was born. I wanted to look like myself, not helpless, not dramatic, not like the confused woman Richard had spent weeks describing to everyone else. Just myself. Denise drove me to the courthouse. The building was older than I expected, with stone steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Inside the halls smelled faintly of paper coffee and rain-damp coats. People moved quietly past us, lawyers carrying folders, parents holding children's hands, couples speaking in low, tense voices. I wondered how many of them had walked in believing their life was still one thing, only to leave knowing it had become another. Claire met us near the courtroom door. She was holding a thick file against her chest. "The judge has reviewed the emergency request," she said. "Today is not the final hearing. We are asking for immediate protection while the investigation continues." I nodded, though my mouth had gone dry. "What if Richard lies?" I asked. Claire looked directly at me. Then we show the court what the records say. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. There were wooden benches, a clerk's desk, a judge's bench, and flags standing near the wall. I sat beside Claire at one of the tables near the front. Then Richard walked in. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. He wore a dark suit I had helped him choose years ago for Megan's college graduation. His hair was neatly combed. His expression was calm, almost concerned. Beside him stood Martin Hayes. Martin avoided looking at me. Richard did not. He met my eyes with the same controlled expression he had worn in our kitchen when he told me nobody would believe me. But now there were other people in the room. There was a judge. There was a clerk. There were lawyers. And to my surprise, there was Megan. She entered quietly through the side door, wearing a pale blue blouse beneath a long cardigan. Her eyes searched the room until they found me. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to come to me. Then Richard touched her elbow. Not forcefully, just enough. Megan stopped beside him. Something inside me broke a little. Claire leaned close to me. "Stay focused." The judge entered a few minutes later. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. Claire spoke first. She explained that my savings account had been emptied through multiple transfers over a period of weeks. She explained that the two-step verification number had been changed from my phone to Richard's. She submitted the bank records, the transaction history, the documents related to Oak Ridge Property Holdings, and the proposed transfer of our home. Richard's attorney stood when she finished. He was a clean-cut man with silver hair and a careful voice. He spoke as though this were all a misunderstanding between a worried husband and an emotional wife. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Monroe has spent decades supporting his family. He has been trying to manage significant financial pressures while also caring for his wife, who has shown signs of confusion and distress." I felt my shoulders tense. "She has recently left the marital home without notice," he continued. "She has accused her husband of theft without understanding the financial arrangements involved." Megan lowered her eyes. Richard sat beside his attorney with his hands folded. He looked sad. That was the cruelest part. He looked like the injured one. The judge turned toward Richard. "Mr. Monroe, do you wish to speak?" Richard stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice sounded steady, gentle. "I love my wife," he said. "I have never wanted to hurt her. Taylor has been under a lot of stress since retirement. She's been forgetting things, becoming anxious, and misunderstanding conversations." I stared at him. He did not look at me while he said it. "I moved the money temporarily because my business was under pressure," he continued. "The intention was always to protect our assets. I was trying to make sure our home and finances were secure." Claire's pen moved quickly across her notepad. Richard went on. "The documents she found were part of future planning. We are getting older. I thought it was responsible to prepare for medical decisions, financial support, and long-term care if it ever became necessary." His attorney nodded along with every sentence. Richard's voice became softer. "I never imagined Taylor would take it this way." For a brief second, I questioned myself, not because I believed him, but because I recognized the version of him he was presenting. The man who fixed things, the man who worried, the man who always had an explanation. Then I remembered the recording. She trusts me. By the time she does, it'll be too late. Claire stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to submit an audio recording." Richard's head lifted. It was the first crack in his calm expression. His attorney immediately objected. "Foundation has not been established." Claire nodded. "We have the original file, preserved copies, a forensic audio specialist, and a preliminary authentication statement. We are not asking the court to make a final ruling today. We are asking the court to consider the recording in evaluating the urgency of temporary relief." The judge looked down at the documents in front of her. Then she said, "I will allow a limited portion." Claire pressed play. The courtroom fell silent. At first, there was static. Then Richard's voice came through the speaker. "You worry too much, Martin." His attorney shifted beside him. Megan's face changed. The next words played. "She won't find out," Richard said. "And even if she does, she won't know what to do with it." I watched Megan slowly turn toward her father. Richard stared straight ahead. Claire paused the audio after the part about the escrow funds. Then she played another section. Martin's voice asked, "And you're sure she'll sign after the evaluation?" Richard answered, "She'll sign. Once the doctor puts concerns in writing, she won't have much choice." The room went still. Megan's hand rose to her mouth. Richard's attorney objected again, but this time his voice lacked confidence. Claire played one final section. "She trusts me," Richard said. "Once I've got the refinance done, Oak Ridge takes title." The judge stopped the recording. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I looked at Richard. He had gone pale, not frightened exactly, angry. The kind of anger that comes when someone realizes the story they built is falling apart. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. Richard shook his head once sharply. The judge looked from the documents to the speaker, then back to Richard. "Mr. Monroe," she said, "is that your voice?" Richard's jaw tightened. It was taken out of context. The judge did not react. "Is it your voice?" Richard looked toward his attorney. Then he answered quietly, "Yes." Megan stared at him. "Dad," she whispered. He turned to her quickly. "Megan, you don't understand what you heard." But she moved one small step away from him. That was all. One step. Yet it felt like the first real crack in the wall he had built between us. The judge spoke again. "Given the bank records, the altered verification information, the proposed transfer documents, and the audio evidence presented today, this court finds there is sufficient cause for temporary emergency relief." My heart began pounding. The judge issued an order preventing Richard Martin and Oak Ridge Property Holdings from selling, refinancing, transferring, or placing additional liens against the house until further review. She also ordered that funds connected to the escrow account be preserved while the investigation continued. The Friday closing was stopped, just like that, not forever, not completely, but stopped. Richard's face did not change until the judge rose and left the room. Then he turned toward me. His eyes were cold, not sad, not concerned, cold. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Instead, he stood, gathered his papers, and walked out with Martin and his attorney. Megan remained behind. She looked at me across the courtroom, tears gathering in her eyes. "I didn't know," she said. "I wanted to rush to her. I wanted to tell her it was all right, but it was not all right, not yet." So I simply said, "I know." And for the first time since this nightmare began, my daughter looked at me as though she was beginning to believe me. Megan did not call me that night. At first I told myself I understood. She had spent her entire life believing Richard was the steady one, the dependable one, the father who fixed her bicycle chain when she was 8, drove through a snowstorm to bring her soup when she had the flu in college, and sat in the front row when she became a nurse. It would take time for her to accept that the man she remembered was also capable of planning to take everything from me. But understanding did not make the silence easier. I stayed at Denise's house, sitting by the guest room window long after the lamps were turned off downstairs. My phone rested on the nightstand beside me. Every few minutes I picked it up, checked the screen, and put it down again. No message, no call. Only the quiet blue light of the clock blinking 11:42, then 12:17, then 1:03. I did not sleep much. The next morning, Claire called me shortly after 9. "The court order has been delivered to the title company and the bank," she said. "The closing cannot go forward." For the first time, I let myself breathe. That means the house is safe. It means it is protected for now, Claire said carefully. "But Richard may still try to pressure you, contact you, or create another version of events. Don't meet him alone. Don't sign anything. And keep saving every message." "I understand." There was a pause. "Have you heard from Megan?" "No." "She may need time," Claire said. "But she heard the recording. That matters." After we ended the call, I went downstairs to find Denise sitting at the kitchen table with her glasses low on her nose reading the local paper. She looked up when she saw me. Any word, I shook my head. Denise folded the paper. Your daughter loves you. I know. She's just trying to understand how someone can be two different people at once. I sat across from her and wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. I keep thinking I should have told her sooner. You did tell her, Denise said. Richard had simply been speaking louder. Those words stayed with me. Richard had been speaking louder, not louder with his voice, but louder with repetition, with doubt, with the familiar authority of being the husband, the father, the man who had always handled things. By late afternoon, my phone finally rang. Megan's name appeared on the screen. For 1 second, I could not answer. Then I did. Hi, sweetheart. Her breath caught on the other end. Mom. That one word sounded exhausted. Are you okay? I asked. I don't know. I closed my eyes. Where are you? At my house. The kids are with Daniel's mother for a few hours. Do you want me to come over? No, she said quickly. I need to tell you something. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Okay. Megan took a breath. Dad came to see me this morning. My stomach tightened. What did he say? He said the recording was edited. Of course he did. He said Martin took pieces of different conversations and put them together. He said you and Claire made it sound worse than it was. And did you believe him? There was a long silence. I wanted to, she whispered. The honesty in her voice hurt. But then I remembered something. I waited. Dad texted me 3 weeks ago, she said. He asked me to help him convince you to see a doctor. I swallowed. What exactly did he say? I didn't think much about it then. He said you were stressed and needed someone professional to look at your memory. He asked whether I knew a doctor who could put concerns in writing if needed. My fingers tightened around the phone. Put concerns in writing. The same words from the voice memo. Megan, I said softly. Do you still have those messages? Yes. And the messages about the papers, I have those too. I heard her breathing unevenly. He asked me to tell you that signing the documents would make things easier for everyone. He told me not to push too hard because you might get suspicious. The room seemed to tilt beneath me. Richard had been using Megan more deeply than I knew. Not just to make her doubt me. He had been trying to turn her into part of the plan. I'm so sorry, Mom, Megan said. The words came out broken. I should have seen it. I should have listened to you. Tears rose in my eyes, but I blinked them back. You were trying to trust your father, I said. That is not something you should feel ashamed of. But I told you to calm down. You were scared. I let him make me think you were losing your mind. This time I did not know what to say, because she was right, and because I could hear how much it was hurting her to admit it. Finally, I said, what happened when he came to see you? Megan exhaled slowly. I asked him about the messages. I gripped the phone tighter. What did he say? At first he laughed. He said I was reading too much into them. Then I asked why he wanted a doctor to put concerns in writing. Her voice began to shake. He got angry, Mom. I pictured Richard in Megan's living room, standing near the sofa where he had once read bedtime stories to her children. I pictured the expression I had seen at the courthouse after the judge stopped the closing. The coldness, the anger beneath the calm. What did he say? I asked again. Megan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he said you didn't deserve to keep that money while he was drowning. My breath stopped. He said he was the one carrying the bills, the business, the responsibility. He said you were sitting on nearly $100,000 while he was losing everything. I stared down at the kitchen table. All those years came rushing back at once. The school library, the extra shifts, the lunches I packed instead of buying, the vacations we skipped, the old car I drove long after it should have been replaced. I had saved that money because I knew life could become uncertain. But Richard had looked at it and decided it was proof I owed him something. Megan continued. He said you were selfish. He said you were too old to understand what real pressure looked like. A strange calm settled over me, not because the words did not hurt, they did, but because I finally understood something important. Richard did not believe he had stolen from me. He believed he was entitled to take from me. That was why he could laugh. That was why he could lie so easily. He had decided my work, my savings, my home, and even my voice belonged to him because I was his wife. "What did you say?" I asked Megan. I told him he was wrong. Her voice grew steadier. I told him you worked your whole life. I told him you gave up things for us that I didn't even realize when I was younger. You took extra shifts when I needed braces. You helped pay for my textbooks. You sent money when I was in nursing school and never made me feel guilty about it. I pressed my lips together. I told him that money wasn't something you were hiding from us. It was something you earned. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Megan said, "He told me I was taking your side because you made me feel sorry for you." I closed my eyes, and I told him I wasn't taking sides anymore. I was looking at what he did. I felt my throat tighten. Megan had finally stepped outside the story Richard had created, not because I forced her to, because she had seen the truth herself. I saved all the messages she said. I took screenshots. I forwarded them to my personal email so Dad can't delete anything from my phone. My heart began to pound. "Can you send them to Claire?" "Yes. I can give you her email." "I already have it," Megan said quietly. "I called her before I called you." For the first time since the hearing, I smiled. A small smile, a tired one, but real. "I'm proud of you," I told her. Megan began to cry. "I don't feel proud," she whispered. "I feel like I failed you." "You didn't fail me," I said. "You were lied to. There is a difference." The next day, Claire confirmed that Megan's messages were important. Richard had asked her to help arrange a medical evaluation. He had urged her to persuade me to sign documents. He had written that I needed to be handled gently because I was starting to question things. Those words became part of the evidence, and they did something else too. They gave Megan a reason to stop doubting herself. By the end of that week, my daughter was no longer standing beside Richard in court. She was standing beside me. Not because the pain had disappeared, not because trust could be rebuilt in a single phone call, but because she had finally understood what her father had tried to do. He had not only stolen my savings, he had tried to steal my daughter's faith in me. And now for the first time, Megan was ready to help me take it back. The truth came in pieces. Not all at once. Not with a dramatic knock at the door or a single document that explained every lie Richard had told. It came through bank statements, business filings, late payment notices, emails, and records that showed how long he had been falling before he decided to pull me down with him. Claire called me into her office the following Monday. Megan came too. It was the first time the three of us had sat together without Richard's shadow hanging over every word. Megan looked tired. She had dark circles beneath her eyes, and she kept twisting the strap of her purse in her hands. But when I sat down, she reached for my fingers. She did not say anything at first. She just held my hand. Claire entered with several thick folders and placed them on the conference table. "I want to prepare both of you," she said. "The financial records are starting to show a clearer pattern." My stomach tightened. I thought I was ready. I was not. Claire opened the first folder. "Richard's business had been in serious trouble for at least 18 months, she said, more serious than he admitted. She slid a page toward us. It showed loan balances, unpaid invoices, and notices from suppliers. Richard's company had borrowed money from several sources. Not one normal business loan, several smaller loans, high-interest lines of credit, equipment financing, outstanding bills to material suppliers. One balance had been overdue for more than 6 months. Another had been sent to collections. I stared at the numbers. I had known business was slow. I had not known it was collapsing. "He never told me," I whispered. Claire nodded. "He appears to have concealed most of this from you." Megan looked down at the papers. "Dad said there were a few difficult jobs," she said quietly. "He said clients were late paying him." "There were difficult jobs," Claire said. But the records suggest a deeper problem. Some projects were underbid. Some materials were purchased before payments were secured. There were also personal withdrawals from the business account. I looked up. Personal withdrawals. Claire turned another page. Restaurant charges. Travel. Cash withdrawals. A lease payment on a truck. Several expenses that do not appear connected to the business. For a moment, I felt something close to disbelief. Richard had always criticized me for buying anything unnecessary. He had questioned a new winter coat. He had complained when I spent money on a small birthday gift for Megan's children. But while he was telling me to be careful, he had been taking money from his business as though consequences belonged to someone else. Megan let out a shaky breath. He told us he was working non-stop because he was trying to keep the company alive. He may have been, Claire said. But he was also hiding how much of the damage came from his own choices. The room became quiet. I looked at Richard's name printed across the documents and felt something in me shift. For years I had treated his stress like a shared burden. When he came home exhausted, I made dinner and tried not to ask too many questions. When he said a client delayed payment, I told him things would improve. When he snapped at me, I told myself he was under pressure. I had turned his problems into reasons to be patient. He had turned my patience into an opportunity. Claire opened another folder. This is where your savings account comes in. She placed a bank tracing report in front of me. The money had moved from my savings in a series of transfers. Some went directly into an account tied to Oak Ridge Property Holdings. Others moved through an escrow account connected to a title company. But that was not the end of it. Several days after the money reached escrow, part of it had been transferred to cover a business debt tied to Richard's company. Another portion had gone toward past due supplier bills, and another amount had been used to settle one of the high-interest loans. I stared at the report until the words blurred. He used my savings to pay his debts, I said. Yes, Claire replied. He told Martin it was for the house. It was partly for the house plan, she said. But it also appears he used it to stabilize his business long enough to move forward with the property transfer. The room felt suddenly too small. My savings had not simply disappeared into a separate account. They had been broken apart, used, spent, scattered through the wreckage of a business Richard had refused to explain. Megan squeezed my hand harder. "Mom," she whispered. I did not cry. Not then. I think I had passed beyond tears for a while. I felt anger, but it was quieter than I expected. It was not a fire, it was a stone, heavy and solid inside my chest. Claire continued. We also found more evidence related to the power of attorney documents. I looked up. What evidence? She placed a photocopy in front of me. It was an old estate planning document from years earlier. I recognized my signature at the bottom. I remembered signing it after my father's death when Richard and I had updated our wills. But beside it was another document, a newer one. The signature looked like mine, but it was not mine. At first glance, it was close enough that someone unfamiliar with my handwriting might not notice, but I knew my own name. The final R in Taylor bent too sharply. The M in Monroe was too wide. The pressure of the pen was wrong. It was a copy of me made by someone who had watched me sign papers for years. That isn't my signature, I said. No, Claire replied. We believe it was copied or traced from an earlier document. Megan covered her mouth. Oh my God, Claire nodded. There are several records that appear to use old documents and altered versions of your signature. We are also reviewing whether Richard used your personal information to access financial systems without authorization. I looked at the pages again. Richard had not just lied, he had manufactured proof. He had prepared documents to make it look as though I had willingly handed him control. I thought about every time I had signed something because he said it was routine. Tax papers, insurance forms, home repair contracts, loan documents, Christmas cards. Marriage had taught me to trust his hand beside mine. He had learned how to use that trust to imitate me. Claire's voice was steady. The bank's fraud department and the title company are cooperating. We have also referred the matter to investigators because there are possible issues involving financial exploitation, forgery and real estate fraud. The word forgery landed differently than fraud had. Fraud meant he had deceived me. Forgery meant he had tried to become me. What happens now? Megan asked. Claire folded her hands. Richard may face civil consequences regardless of what happens criminally. The immediate focus is protecting Taylor's property, tracing the money, and proving which documents were unauthorized. And Martin, I asked. Martin's role is being examined too. Oak Ridge Property Holdings appears to have been used as a vehicle to hold the house and move funds. Whether he understood the full plan or simply helped execute it will matter. I thought of Martin's voice on the recording. You're taking a risk. He had known enough to be afraid. He had stayed anyway. Denise, who had been sitting quietly near the end of the table, spoke at last. Some people see a man drowning and think they can stand close without getting wet. No one replied. Because we all knew Richard had not been drowning alone. He had been pulling people into the water with him. After the meeting, Megan and I walked slowly to the parking garage. The afternoon was cold and bright. Cars moved through the streets below us, and somewhere nearby a siren rose and faded. Megan stopped beside my car. I keep asking myself how I missed it, she said. You didn't have all the information, I told her, but I had signs. I looked at her. Yes, I said gently. You did. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry. I could have told her everything was fine. I could have rushed to make her feel better because that was what mothers do. But I had spent too long making other people comfortable with my pain. So I spoke honestly. I need time, I said. But I'm glad you're here now. Megan nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, I believed her. That night, Claire forwarded me an update. The escrow account had been frozen. The title company had flagged the attempted transfer. A portion of my money was still traceable. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to prove what Richard had done. Enough to show that he had not been protecting our family. He had been protecting himself. And to do it, he had been willing to make me poor, powerless, and invisible. But I was no longer invisible. Not to Claire, not to Megan, not to the bank, and soon not to the people who would decide what Richard's lies were worth. The final mediation was held on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after the emergency hearing. By then the spring rain had finally stopped, but the sky over Dayton still looked pale and uncertain. Denise drove me to Claire's office because I could not bring myself to sit behind the wheel. My hands were steady enough to button my coat, hold my purse, and sign my name at the front desk. But I knew that if I had to make one more decision before walking into that room, I might have turned the car around. Claire had explained that mediation was meant to give everyone one last chance to face the evidence and negotiate before the matter moved further through the court system. Richard had agreed to attend. So had Martin. I did not believe either of them had come to apologize. They had come because the walls were closing in. Megan met us in the lobby. She was wearing a dark green blouse and had her hair pulled back the way she did before a difficult shift at the hospital. When she saw me, she did not ask whether I was ready. She simply took my hand. "I'm here," she said. It was only 2 words, but I felt them settle somewhere deep inside me. Inside the conference room, Richard sat at the far end of the table beside his attorney. Martin sat 2 chairs away with a lawyer of his own. Neither man looked comfortable. The bank records had traced a portion of the money. The escrow account was frozen. The title company had preserved the transfer documents. And Megan's messages had made it impossible for Richard to claim the medical evaluation was an innocent suggestion. Still, when Richard looked at me, he wore the same expression he had worn at the courthouse. Concern. That soft, practiced concern that had once made other people doubt me. "Taylor," he said quietly, "you don't have to do this." I stopped beside my chair. Do what turn our family into a spectacle. For a moment, the old instinct rose inside me, the instinct to lower my voice, to avoid conflict, to protect him from embarrassment even when he had shown me none. Then I remembered the sight he laughed at my empty savings account. I sat down. "You did that yourself," I said. The mediator, a calm woman named Judith Bell, opened the meeting by explaining that everyone would have a chance to speak. She reminded us that the purpose was not to relive every argument, but to reach a resolution based on the evidence. Richard's attorney spoke first. He described Richard as a man under intense financial pressure. He said the business had suffered losses and that Richard had made poor but understandable decisions while trying to preserve marital assets. He called the property transfer an incomplete business strategy. He called the power of attorney documents misunderstood planning materials. Then he looked toward me with a sympathetic expression. "Mrs. Munro has understandably felt betrayed," he said, "but emotions have made communication difficult." I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because there it was again. My fear was emotion. My evidence was misunderstanding. His theft was a poor decision. Claire let him finish. Then she stood. "Mr. Munro did not make a poor decision," she said. "He made a sequence of deliberate decisions, changing Mrs. Munro's security information, transferring funds from an account in her name, directing those funds through escrow, preparing a below-market transfer of her home into a company connected to his associate, and attempting to obtain documents that would give him authority over her finances and medical decisions." Richard's attorney started to object. Claire lifted a folder, and those actions are supported by bank records, title documents, electronic account history, messages to the party's daughter, and an audio recording. The room became quiet. Martin shifted in his chair. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered something. Martin shook his head, but he would not look at me. Judith turned to Richard. "Mr. Munro, do you wish to respond?" Richard folded his hands together. "Yes." His voice was steady at first. "I never meant to hurt Taylor. I was trying to save what we built. The business was in trouble, yes. I made mistakes. But I was desperate. I thought if I could get through one more month, one more contract, I could make it right." I watched him closely. For years I had known when Richard was pretending to be strong. His shoulders went still. His voice slowed. He chose words that sounded responsible. He was doing it now. "I did not take her money because I wanted to control her," he continued. "I took it because everything was collapsing. I was trying to protect our home." "Our home," I said. Richard turned toward me. "Yes, Taylor. Our home, our family. You were going to transfer it to Oak Ridge. Temporarily. You were going to put it into Martin's company because it was the only way to keep creditors from taking it. And you were going to use a doctor to say I wasn't capable of stopping you." Richard's face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. I never said that he replied. Claire looked at Judith. "We would like to play the relevant portion of the recording." Richard's attorney stood. "We have already heard excerpts." "Yes," Claire said, "but Mr. Munro has just denied the substance of the statement." Judith considered the room for a moment. Then she nodded. "Play it." Claire pressed a button on her laptop. The speaker clicked. Static filled the room. Then Martin's voice came through. "You're sure she'll sign after the evaluation?" Richard's recorded voice answered. "She'll sign. Once the doctor puts concerns in writing, she won't have much choice." No one moved. The sound of Richard's own voice hung in the room like smoke. Claire let the recording continue. Martin asked, "And then what?" "You used the old power of attorney," Richard replied. "That's what it's there for. She signed it years ago. She doesn't even remember it." I looked at Richard. He was staring at the table now. But Claire did not stop the recording. The next part was the one I had replayed alone in our bedroom, the one that had changed the shape of my life. "Once I've got the refinance done, Oak Ridge takes title. It's cleaner that way. We get the property under the company, clear the pressure, and nobody asks questions." Then Martin's voice. The house is worth more than what you're putting on paper. Richard's answer came without hesitation. I know. That's the point. Claire paused the audio. Judith turned to Martin. Mr. Hayes, were you aware of the proposed transfer? Martin swallowed. His lawyer began to speak, but Martin raised a hand. I knew about the company, he said. I knew Richard was trying to protect the property from creditors. Did you know the property was being transferred below market value? Judith asked. Martin stared at his hands. I knew it was low. Did you know Mrs. Munro had not agreed? His silence answered before his words did. I thought Richard had handled it, he muttered. Claire's voice was quiet but sharp. You heard him say she would sign after a medical evaluation. You heard him say she didn't remember the old power of attorney. Martin's face reddened. I told him it was risky. You stayed involved, Claire said. The mediator's eyes returned to Richard. Mr. Munro, what did you mean when you said Mrs. Munro would not have much choice? Richard looked up at last. His face was pale, but anger flickered beneath it. I meant she needed help, he said. Taylor was not thinking clearly. Megan stood from her chair. The movement was so sudden that everyone turned toward her. No, she said. Her voice trembled, but it was loud enough for every person in that room to hear. You said she didn't deserve the money. You said she was too old to understand real pressure. You asked me to help convince her to sign things she did not understand. Richard stared at her. Megan, this is not your place. She flinched, but she did not sit down. It is my place, she said. You used me. You made me think Mom was sick, so I would help you take control of her life. Richard's control finally cracked. I was trying to save this family, he snapped. The room went silent. He looked at me, then his eyes hard and bright. You had money sitting there while I was drowning. You had no idea what I was dealing with. I had no idea because you lied to me, I said. You would have judged me. I would have helped you. He laughed once. A short, bitter sound. No, you would have panicked. You would have made it worse. That laugh hit me harder than his anger, because I had heard it before, on the recording, in the kitchen, in the place where he believed I had no power. Claire spoke quietly. Mr. Munro, did you believe Mrs. Munro would be too embarrassed to challenge you? Richard's face froze. For 1 second, I thought he might refuse to answer. Then he looked around the room, the lawyers, the mediator, Martin, Megan, Denise, me, and something inside him seemed to collapse. I thought she wouldn't fight, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. I thought she would be too ashamed. I thought she would think nobody would take her seriously. Megan began to cry. I did not. Not because I was stronger than anyone else in that room, but because the truth had finally been spoken without hiding behind paperwork. Richard had never misunderstood me. He had underestimated me. The meeting ended soon after that. There was no agreement that day. Richard's attorney asked for time to review the evidence and discuss settlement terms. Martin's attorney requested separate conversations about the company records. But when I stepped out of the conference room, I felt different. I had walked in carrying the weight of every doubt Richard had planted in me. I walked out knowing that his power had always depended on my silence. The settlement conference took place 10 days after the mediation. By then, the house had been protected by the court order long enough for the title company, the bank and Claire's team to finish reviewing the documents. I had expected to feel triumphant walking into Claire's office that morning. Instead, I felt tired, not weak, not defeated. Just tired in the way a person feels after carrying something far too heavy for far too long. Denise sat beside me in the waiting area, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me without asking how I took it. She already knew. Whatever happens today, she said, you have already won the part that matters. I looked at her. What part is that? You stopped believing his version of you. Her words stayed with me as Claire opened the conference room door. Richard was already inside. He looked older than he had only a month earlier. The confident posture was gone. His suit hung loosely around his shoulders. His hair was not combed the way it usually was for court or meetings. He sat beside his attorney staring down at a legal pad filled with notes. Martin was not there. His attorney had sent a statement saying Martin would cooperate with the ongoing investigation and provide company records connected to Oak Ridge Property Holdings. Claire had explained that Martin was trying to protect himself now that the evidence had become impossible to ignore. I did not feel sorry for him. He had heard Richard's plan, he had known it was wrong, and he had stayed involved because he hoped there would be money at the end of it. Claire placed a folder in front of me. "This is the proposed agreement," she said. "I want to go through it slowly." I nodded. The first pages confirmed what I already knew. The attempted refinance was cancelled. The proposed transfer of our house to Oak Ridge Property Holdings had been voided. The documents that used my forged or altered signature would be formally withdrawn and treated as unauthorized. I read every line twice. For years I had signed papers because Richard told me they were routine. Not anymore. The next section addressed the escrow account. The funds that remained there had been frozen and traced. Some of my savings had already been used to pay Richard's business debts, but a large portion was still recoverable. The agreement required those funds to be returned to an account under my sole control. When I reached the amount, my eyes filled with tears. It was not all of it. It could never be all of it. Not completely. Some money had already vanished into creditors' overdue materials and loans Richard had taken without telling me. But it was enough to begin again. Enough to prove that I had not imagined the theft. Enough to show that my life had value beyond what Richard thought he could take. Claire continued, "The house will remain titled solely in your name as part of the divorce agreement." I looked up. Richard's attorney shifted in his chair. Claire went on, "Richard will waive any claim to the home. In return, he will retain responsibility for the business debts connected to his company and the debts he incurred through Oak Ridge." For a moment, I could not speak. That house had been the center of every fear I carried since the voice memo first played. I had imagined coming home to changed locks. I had imagined watching strangers walk through the rooms where Megan grew up. I had imagined Richard turning the place I loved into another piece of paperwork. Now Claire was telling me it would stay mine. Not ours. Mine. Richard finally looked at me. His eyes were tired, but I did not see remorse in them. I saw resentment, as if I had done something to him, as if protecting myself had been a betrayal. "You're really going to take everything," he said. The words were quiet but sharp enough to cut. I stared at him. For years I would have apologized automatically. I would have said I did not want to hurt him. I would have reminded him that we had shared a life. But I thought of my empty bank account, the nursing home brochures, the forged signature, the plan to use Megan against me, and I realized that there are moments when kindness towards someone else becomes cruelty toward yourself. "I'm taking back what you tried to steal," I said. Richard's face hardened. "You don't understand what it was like." "No," I replied, "because you never told me." He looked away. That was the first honest thing he had done in weeks. The settlement terms also required Richard to provide complete financial records related to his business and to Oak Ridge Property Holdings. Any future recovery from Martin or the company would go toward restoring the remaining portion of my savings. Claire explained that the investigation into the fraudulent transfers and property documents was continuing separately. No one made promises about criminal charges. No one told me justice would arrive in a perfect, dramatic package. But the records had been preserved, the forged documents had been exposed, and the people who had tried to use them would no longer be able to hide behind silence. When the meeting ended, Richard stood slowly. For a second I thought he might say goodbye. Instead, he picked up his folder and walked toward the door. Then he stopped. His back was still turned to me. "I did love you," he said. The room went quiet. I looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you loved the version of me who never asked questions," I said. "But that isn't love." Richard did not answer. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And just like that, the man I had built my life around became someone walking away down a hallway I no longer had to follow. Later that afternoon, Megan came to Denise's house. She stood at the front door holding a paper bag from my favorite bakery. When I opened it, she looked so much like the little girl who used to hide behind my legs when strangers came over that my heart tightened. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Hi." For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she held out the bag. "I brought cinnamon rolls." I took it from her. "That was always your way of apologizing when you were 12, I said. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." We sat at Denise's kitchen table, the same place where I had first played the voice memo for someone who believed me. Megan looked down at her hands. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she said. "I don't even know if I deserve it." I took a slow breath. "You were manipulated," I said, "but you also doubted me when I needed you." She nodded, crying quietly now. "I know. I need time. I understand. But I don't want to lose you," I added. Megan looked up. "You won't." "I need you to understand something," I said. "Being my daughter does not mean you get to decide what is best for me. Not anymore. You can love me. You can support me. But you have to respect my choices." She wiped her eyes. "I will. I promise." I did not know whether promises were enough. Not yet. But I had learned that healing did not begin with pretending nothing happened. It began with naming what happened honestly. A week later, I returned to my house. Denise came with me, though I told her I could manage on my own. She smiled and said she was not asking permission. The front door opened with my key, the same key Richard had once joked I would lose someday. Inside the house smelled faintly stale, like closed windows and old memories. I stood in the entryway for a long time. Then I walked into the kitchen. The yellow paint was still there. The counter was still there. The same clock hung above the stove. But I was not the same woman who had stood in that room while Richard told me no one would believe me. I opened every curtain. I let the afternoon light pour in. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the house belonged to me again. 6 months after I heard Richard laugh on that voice memo, I woke up one Saturday morning and realized I had slept through the night. No nightmares. No panic when my phone buzzed. No instinct to check whether someone had moved, my papers changed my passwords, or taken something that belonged to me. Just quiet. For a few minutes I lay in bed listening to the soft rain against the windows. The house felt different now, not because the walls had changed, but because I had. Richard's office was no longer Richard's office. I had emptied the drawers one by one. I boxed up the old invoices, the hardware catalogs, and the framed photos of remodeling jobs he once bragged about. I did not destroy them. I did not want revenge to become the thing that defined me, but I did not want his presence filling that room either. So I painted the walls a warm cream color and turned the space into a reading room. I brought in the old green armchair from the living room, placed a lamp beside it, and added shelves for the books I had saved over the years. Novels, biographies, poetry, old children's books from the library that had been donated to me when the branch was renovated. On the wall I hung a framed photograph of my parents at the lake. For the first time in months, I had a room that felt completely mine. The divorce was finalized in late summer. The house stayed in my name. The recovered funds were placed into a new account under my sole control with new passwords, new security alerts, and a system that sent every transaction directly to my phone. Claire had helped me make sure I understood every document before signing it. Every word, every page, every consequence. At first, I hated going to the bank. Even walking through the front doors made my chest tighten. I would see the counters, the glass offices, the soft carpet, and remember sitting there with my hands shaking while Rebecca told me my verification number had been changed. But eventually, I stopped letting that memory own the building. I met with a financial advisor recommended by Denise. Not because I wanted someone else to manage my life, but because I wanted to understand every part of it for myself. I learned about account alerts, credit freezes, beneficiary designations, estate planning, and the importance of keeping copies of documents where no one else could access them. For years, I thought independence meant doing everything alone. Now I understood that independence also meant knowing when to ask questions and who to trust with the answers. Denise came over every Wednesday afternoon. Sometimes we had coffee in the reading room. Sometimes we sat on the back porch and watched the neighborhood children ride bicycles up and down the sidewalk. Sometimes we did nothing at all except enjoy the silence. One afternoon, she looked around my kitchen and smiled. "You know what I like most?" she asked. "What? You stopped making this house look like a place you're waiting to leave." I looked at the yellow walls, the new curtains, the vase of fresh tulips on the counter. She was right. For months I had treated the house like it was fragile, like it could disappear again if I loved it too much. But slowly, I began to make plans. I planted roses along the fence. I replaced the old dining room rug. I bought a small round table for the breakfast nook, something Richard had always said was unnecessary. Each change was small, but each one said the same thing. I am staying. A few weeks after the divorce, I went back to the public library, not as an employee this time, as a guest speaker. The library had started a small community series for older adults called Protecting Your Future. Denise encouraged me to speak after she attended one of the sessions. At first, I refused. "I'm not an expert," I told her. "You're an expert in surviving something most people never see coming," she replied. That stayed with me, So I stood in front of 23 people in a meeting room where I had once helped children choose books for summer reading. My voice shook during the first few minutes. Then I told them the truth. Not every detail. Some things were still too personal, but I told them that financial abuse can come from people you love. I told them that concern can sometimes be used as a disguise for control. I told them to protect their passwords, read documents carefully, and never let someone convince them that asking questions makes them difficult. Afterward, an older woman approached me. She had white hair, bright blue eyes, and a cane in one hand. "My son keeps asking me to put him on my accounts," she said quietly. "He says it's only in case of emergencies." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "You deserve time to think before you give anyone access to your life." She nodded, and her eyes filled with tears. That was when I understood why I had survived all of it. Not because I wanted to become stronger than Richard, not because I wanted anyone to pity me, but because silence had almost cost me everything. And maybe my story could help someone else speak before it was too late. Megan and I were still rebuilding. It was not easy. There were days when I saw her name on my phone and felt the old hurt rise before I could stop it. There were moments when she apologized so often that I had to tell her not to turn guilt into another way of making me carry the emotional weight. But she listened. That mattered. She came over for dinner every other Sunday. At first, we kept the conversations simple. Her children, work at the hospital, the garden, books she thought I would like. Then little by little we began talking about the harder things. One evening while we were washing dishes, Megan said, "I still don't understand how Dad became that person." I dried a plate slowly. "I don't know that he became someone else," I said. "Maybe he was always capable of it. Maybe I just believed the best of him for too long." Megan looked down. "I don't want to become someone who ignores the truth because it's painful." "You won't," I told her. "Not if you keep learning from it." She looked at me, then her eyes wet but steady. "I'm trying." "I know," I said, and I meant it. On the first Sunday of autumn, Megan texted me in the morning. "Would you like us to come for dinner tonight?" For a moment, I stood in the kitchen holding my phone. The old tailor might have said yes, because she was afraid of being alone. The wounded tailor might have said no because forgiveness felt too dangerous. But I was neither of those women anymore. I was a woman who understood that love without boundaries becomes an invitation for harm. So I typed back, "Yes, dinner at 6, bring the kids. And Megan, thank you for asking, not assuming." Her reply came almost immediately. "I understand now. That evening I cooked roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans. The same kind of meal I had made 100 times before. But the kitchen did not feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like mine." When Megan arrived, she brought flowers. My grandchildren ran through the hallway laughing as they searched for the old board games I had saved in the closet. I stood near the doorway for a moment and watched them. The house was full again, not with fear, not with secrets, with life. I had lost money. I had lost a marriage. I had lost the illusion that love alone could protect me from betrayal. But I had gained something Richard could never take, my voice. And this time, I knew exactly how to use it. End of part 15. The lesson: the people closest to us are not automatically entitled to control our money, our home, our choices, or our future. Love should never require you to become silent, confused, or afraid to ask questions. Taylor's story is not only about a husband who betrayed her. It is about the danger of ignoring your own instincts when someone repeatedly tells you that you are overreacting, too emotional, too forgetful, or incapable of managing your own life. Manipulation often begins quietly. It may sound like concern, it may look like help, but real help does not take away your voice. Financial independence is not selfish. Reading documents carefully is not distrustful. Asking for proof is not disloyal. Protecting yourself is not an act of revenge. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop explaining their pain to someone who benefits from misunderstanding it. Taylor did not win because she became cruel. She won because she gathered evidence, asked for help, trusted her instincts, and refused to let shame keep her quiet. She learned that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman sitting alone in a room pressing play on the truth and deciding she will never be erased again. What would you have done if someone you loved tried to take your money, your home, or your freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from and what time it is there. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for more powerful stories about courage, family, and finding your voice.